All right, welcome to the show. I'm your host, Bill Hargenrader, best-selling author of Mars Journey, Call to Action, an online community ambassador for the Mars Society. I'm here today with the founder and president of the Mars Society, Dr. Robert Zubrin. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
All right. So if we've actually interviewed Robert before, if you want to go to Red Planet Radio podcast, interview number 1, we can talk about Robert's inspiration for the Mars Society, his aspirations for it and all that. But today we're going to get a little more technical. So Robert just got back from the IAC where Elon Musk made his announcement about SpaceX plan to colonize Mars. So let's turn it over to you, Robert. What are your thoughts on your trip to the IAC, what the IAC is, and also Elon's plan?
Well, the IAC is the International Astronautical Congress. It's basically the leading and largest worldwide space organization and professional organization of aerospace. And Musk, of course, spoke there in an extremely well-attended session. It was the high point of the conference. Now, personally, I had wished that he would have spent more time talking about his nearer-term plans of the Red Dragon mission and its follow-up and various payloads that he would be landing on Mars in the 2020s with Falcon Heavies and Dragons and comparable hardware leading up perhaps to a manned human landing in the late 2020s. But he only devoted the quick cursory mention in one chart to all that, and instead focused on this Mars Colonial Transport, which has now been, I guess, renamed the Interplanetary Transport System. And there are a lot of good and valuable ideas in the presentation and in the conceptual design. But in the way they were put together, I do not believe the system is practical, and I think it will have to be modified and should be modified substantially before it's ever really designed and built, and that it can be, and that would make it much more efficient and much lower cost. So, first of all, what was it? He outlined a completely reusable system for transporting 100 people at a time from Earth to Mars, so that to rapidly colonize Mars with the goal of getting a Mars population up to 1 million people in some reasonably short length of time through a large number of these very big ships. Each ship transports 100 passengers. Each ship is launched halfway to orbit by a reusable first stage, and then the second stage takes it all the way to orbit. And then that second stage is refueled on orbit and goes all the way from low Earth orbit to the surface of Mars, where it is refueled with methane oxygen made on the surface of Mars,
right,
which is a key idea that I introduced into Mars mission design a long time ago with the Mars Direct plan. And then it is refueled and it is shot all the way back to LEO. So it involves direct return from the Martian surface with in situ methane oxygen propellant. All the hardware is reused. It involves refilling on orbit, which was not in my Mars Direct architecture, but if you can do it, is a very valuable thing to do. Those were some of the major features. And of course, very importantly, a very large ship. And in fact, that second stage has 7 million pounds of thrust, equivalent to the takeoff thrust of a Saturn V moon rocket. That's the second stage. The first stage has a thrust equal to 4 or 5 Saturn Vs. So this is basically like a Saturn 20, is what the booster is, with a reusable first stage. So it's a huge ship. Now, one problem with this architecture is that he takes that second stage with its 7 million pounds of thrust all the way from low Earth orbit to the surface of Mars, where it is vastly oversized for the mission, and a 7 million pound thrust engine, just the engine, weighs over 60 tons. So that's 60 tons of mass you're shooting from LEO to the surface of Mars and shooting it back. And the whole stage as well is way oversized for this mission. What needs to be done here is he needs to stage off of that second stage just short of Earth escape. In other words, it takes about 3.2 kilometers a second delta V to go from LEO to Earth escape. He should stage off of it after about 3 kilometers a second. So it is still bound to the Earth, and it will loop around and reach LEO again in less than a week. Whereas if it goes to Mars, it's not coming back for 2.5 years, and it won't be reusable for 4 years. So if you stage off of it that big and powerful piece and very expensive piece of hardware will be reusable in a matter of weeks instead of 4 years.
Yeah.
And that means you can get 10 times the payload out of it. So you can greatly increase the productivity of the capital by staging off of that. So once again, this is not expendable staging. This is reusable staging. Keep that thing based in geocentric space. Don't drag it all the way to the surface of Mars. And by staging off of it in this way, the propulsion required for the thing that goes to Mars becomes much smaller, much lighter. And then furthermore, we don't want to, when we get to Mars, keep this whole giant 100-person habitat on the ship and shoot it back to Earth. It's needed on Mars. So we want to unload the primary habitat on Mars to be housing for Mars colonists and only shoot the thing back with a small cabin for the pilots and maybe a couple of colonists who want to go home.
Yeah.
The idea of Mars missions is to go to Mars with as much as you can but come back with as little as you can, because Mars is what needs the stuff. We had an awful lot of stuff here already. So in this way, what you could do is you could get 10 times more utilization out of that big second stage. You greatly increase the cargo payload delivered to Mars by a very large factor, depending upon the design, but by hundreds of tons per mission. And you do much more to build up the Mars colony with each mission. Yep. And the amount of propellant that's needed to refuel it to send it home, and this is a burden on the Mars base to produce all this propellant, is reduced by at least a factor of 4, if not more. So that's the way this should be modified. Now, you could go further. Because that upper stage is now delivering 10 times as much payload as it was before, that means we could downscale the system and still deliver the same payload. So instead of having to deliver a 500-ton spaceship to Earth orbit, which he can't do and no one else can do, we could deliver a 50-ton spaceship to low Earth orbit, which Falcon Heavy will be able to do, right, which New Glenn will be able to do, which SLS will be able to more than do. So if you do this, you can take this gigantic futuristic spaceship and take it out of the realm of the impossible and put it in the realm of the possible, and not just the possible someday, but the possible in the 2020s.
I like it. I do. What are your thoughts on, did we hear that 3 months travel time to Mars?
Well,
because it's normally 6 months, right? 6 to 7 months.
Well, okay. The minimum energy trajectory to Mars is 8.5 months.
Okay.
You can cut the travel time to 6 months without too much extra propellant, and it's a good idea to do it because the 6-month trajectory to Mars, if you choose not to stop at Mars, is also the free return trajectory that loops around and gets back to Earth exactly 2 years after you left. If you try going faster than that, 2 things happen. First of all, you rapidly lose payload because more and more propellant is needed to go faster and faster. And second of all, you lose the free return. So you're losing a lot of cargo and you're losing the free return. So you are detracting from payload delivery a lot. For instance, to go to Mars in 4 months, you could do it, but it'll cut your payload by about a factor of 3. 3 months might be possible, but it would probably cut it by a factor of 5. Yeah. Less than that is not possible, and not with chemical propulsion. And furthermore, it doesn't make any sense to do it because this is a colonization mission. And if you're going to Mars to stay for the rest of your life, it hardly matters whether you get there in 6 months or 4 months. And furthermore, if the goal of the mission, if the goal of the technology is to reduce the cost of sending someone to Mars one way to the cost of a house, a middle-class house, which, by the way, is a criteria for Mars colonization that I laid out in my book, The Case for Mars, in 1996, and which is based on what it was in colonial America. Okay, basically the liquidation of the household of a middle-class British family or 7 years' work of a working man. You know, if you were to put it in today's terms, $300,000 could be the cost of a house, or it could be 7 years' salary for a working stiff. So that would do it. Well, anyway, you want it to cost one house to go to Mars, but if you try to go fast, it will cost 3 houses to go to Mars. Now, okay, you and I, we're both middle-class people, okay? Would you rather go to Mars in 6 months at the cost of 1 house, or 3 months at the cost of 3 houses?
I'll take the 1 house. Yeah.
Yeah. So therefore, this idea that you have to go to Mars fast is a conceit which really needs to be dropped, particularly out of a colonization program, and I would argue out of a Mars exploration mission program. Because even if you're talking a NASA exploration mission, say, who is safer? An astronaut who gets to Mars in 3 months and has no free return, or an astronaut who gets to Mars in 6 months, has a free return, and has quadruply backed up life support systems, okay, because he has much more payload. Yeah. He's much safer. So trying to go to Mars fast detracts from colonization, and it detracts from exploration.
So when we get to Mars, in this plan, we hear a lot about what's already there. And so this past week, I took part in this Mars City Design Challenge by Verimuliani. I don't know if you heard of this, but they had the award ceremony, and I actually had a team that won for the agriculture category. But the question comes up: if it's $200,000 just for the trip, there's going to be extra costs for living on Mars, won't there be? And what are your thoughts on what should be waiting there for them when they arrive?
Well, presumably, when they get to Mars, what's waiting for them is a job or another form of opportunity. That's why they're going. In other words, they're not going to Mars to pay money to stay there. They're going to Mars to earn money to live there. Now, I actually think a Mars colony, certainly an early Mars colony, could generate a lot of income by being an inventor's colony, because you're going to have a group of technologically adept people in a frontier environment where they're isolated from the distractions of Earth, and they're going to be in a pressure cooker for innovation, because they're going to be challenged in many ways, and they're going to want to come up with solutions to their problems. So they're going to be forced to innovate, and they're going to be free to innovate by the weakness of any attempted bureaucratic restrictions on innovation from Earth. So you can have a very pragmatic culture of a group of very innovative people. Okay, it's going to be colonial or 19th century America cubed. Okay, it's going to be Yankee ingenuity cubed. We had that situation here in America's past. We were a pressure cooker for innovation, but this will be that to an exponential power.
Okay.
And the inventions that they make for their own purposes can be licensed on Earth. Okay, the best things to export from Mars are things that can be transported with radio waves as opposed to with spacecraft, and information. And the most valuable kind of information there is a patent. So you license the patent on Earth, you generate income on Earth, and that is used to provide imports for the colony. Because even with 1 million people on Mars, they'll still need selected imports from Earth of high technology that requires a very large division of labor to create.
Do you think that intellectual property, entertainment, the first play performed on Mars and telecast, do you think there'll be value in that?
Oh, I think there'll be some value in that. But if you look at some giant companies that have been formed fairly recently, Google, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, these vastly more wealth was created with these than is created with, say, a successful television series. They're not comparable. So you could, $10 million here and there is certainly worth talking about. So there will be other forms of intellectual products generated on Mars that could be licensed on Earth. But I think the by far the largest income generators will be technological innovations, patents.
Yeah. That makes sense. And actually, it's good. I think it's a good point. We're about halfway through our interview today. Let's in the case for Mars, your book, you painted out the details for Mars Direct and Mars Semi-Direct. For those who haven't read the book yet, can you just kind of give a quick summary of what Mars Direct and the difference between that and Semi-Direct?
Right. Okay, well, the Mars Direct was my original plan, which was laid out in 1990 and is explained at great length in my book, The Case for Mars. The way it fundamentally works is you want to avoid advanced propulsion, on-orbit assembly, orbiting assembly points, and be able to do a human Mars mission with the sort of technology that we understand quite well today, and understood quite well in 1990 for that matter. Okay, so you need a heavy lift vehicle with about the capability of a Saturn V. And the first one shoots off to Mars, an Earth return vehicle with no one in it. And that goes out, flies out to Mars on a minimum energy trajectory, and then it aerobrakes and lands on Mars. Now what happens then is, using a small nuclear reactor of power of about 100 kilowatts, it starts pumping in the Martian air, which is carbon dioxide, and reacts that with a small amount of hydrogen brought from Earth to produce a large supply of methane oxygen bipropellant. Methane fuel oxygen oxidizer. And now we fuel it up on the surface of Mars this way. In subsequent missions, once we have a base on Mars, we won't need to import hydrogen to Mars. We'll get Martian water out of the soil, which of course is what we would do if we were supporting an architecture like Musk's. So now you have a fully fueled Earth return vehicle sitting waiting on the Martian surface. That being done, at the next launch opportunity, we shoot out to Mars a habitat module with a crew of 4, maybe 5 or 6 astronauts in it. And it flies out to Mars on a 6-month trajectory. It aerobrakes and it lands near the Earth return vehicle. They use their HAB modules, their house on Mars, for 1.5 years while they explore. And at the end of that time, they get in the Earth return vehicle and they fly back to Earth. They leave the habitat behind on Mars. So each time you do this, you add another habitat to the base. And before you know it, you got the beginning of a human settlement on a new world. There's nothing in this that's fundamentally beyond our capability. The semi-direct was a modification of this done because Johnson Space Center wanted to have a bigger Earth return vehicle than we could conveniently shoot off the surface of Mars. So in the semi-direct, there's 3 launches, one of which puts an Earth return vehicle into a highly elliptical Mars orbit, and then the vehicle fueled on Mars doesn't have to go all the way back to Earth. It just goes up to this highly elliptical Mars orbit, where it rendezvous with the Earth return vehicle, which then kicks out of orbit and goes home. This architecture then requires 3 launches. It gives you a much larger Earth return vehicle for the return trip, and it does have a mission-critical Mars orbit rendezvous on the return leg. But it also requires producing only about 1/3 as much propellant on the surface, which lowers the power requirement on the surface. So there's a trade there between it and the original Mars Direct. Either one will do the job. Yeah. But in all 3 cases, it's direct flight to Mars, long duration stays on Mars starting on the first mission, use of Martian resources starting on the first mission, no advanced propulsion, no on-orbit assembly, no need for new orbiting stations to support it, none of that.
So you're saying we could have done this 20 years ago, right?
Well, proposed it 26 years ago. We could have been on Mars by 1999 if we'd done it my way. Actually, if we did it Werner von Braun's way, we could have been on Mars by 1981. But I wasn't involved in that discussion. But I was involved in the discussion of the late 80s, early 90s. And certainly we had humans to Mars by 1999. And right now we've got humans to Mars by 2024. So if Hillary Clinton wants to declare humans to Mars in the spring of her first term, we can do it by the end of her, before the end of her second term.
There you go, 2024. Keep that date in mind. I think last time we did an interview, we spoke at the Mars Society convention. But last time we interviewed was last September, before The Martian came out. And isn't The Martian kind of loosely based on Mars Semi-Direct? And I know we talked to Andy Weary.
Well, a little. There's various things in The Martian that are based on my ideas, and Andy Weir has said so. But really, what's new about The Martian is not new ideas. What's new about The Martian is Hollywood taking Mars seriously and producing a Mars, the first Mars movie. It is the first Mars movie. There are other movies set on Mars, but they're basically shoot-'em-ups or horror pictures. They're not really about the human exploration of Mars. They're not about the actual challenges that humans would face going to Mars. So there's a couple of things in it that are unrealistic, like the terrific windstorm that knocks everything down. You wouldn't get that on Mars. The atmosphere is too thin. But the overall spirit of it is realism, and the overall attitude is can do. we can take it on. And that's the necessary attitude. So I think the movie The Martian's done a lot of good.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree. And I wanted to check in with you. It's probably been a whirlwind of travel for you, but the Mars Society convention just passed. What are maybe just let people know why you started the convention, and then what were some of your highlights or good things from
Well, we
for
have a
you the last
convention every year, and I believe next year it will be in the Los Angeles area,
one? Okay.
possibly UCLA, although we still have to make the arrangements. But Mars Society was founded to help get humans to Mars by spreading the vision, by doing political work to defend Mars programs, and by doing projects of our own, of which the most significant have been the establishment of simulated Mars stations in the American desert and the Canadian Arctic. We have Mars 160, an international crew, is in the desert station right now. Now, at this particular convention, we had a lot of speakers. We had about 80 speakers who just sent in abstracts and were accepted and got a chance to talk about all sorts of things. We had about 16 high-profile plenary speakers. We also had some great debates. We had a terrific debate on the issue of back contamination, or rather NASA's so-called planetary protection program, which, if it remains in place, will prevent humans to Mars. Because if you say you can't go to Mars if there's a risk that you will contaminate Mars, well, then you can't go to Mars. And frankly, it's proving to be an immense impediment to the Mars sample return mission because of this fear of pathogens coming from Mars, which has no basis. There cannot be pathogens on the surface of Mars because, first of all, the surface is bathed in ultraviolet light, and it's got percolates in it, which are sterilizing agents, and there's no liquid water, and there's no macrofauna or macroflora for a pathogen to infect. So this is pure nonsense. And it's also silly because we get rocks sent to Earth naturally by meteoric impact, about 500 kilograms a year, 1,000 pounds of rocks coming to Mars naturally. And to say we have to quarantine rocks that the sample return brings back, and we've got to break the chain of contact with the surface so we can't come back directly. We've got a rendezvous on the way and this and that, and it all makes it much harder. It's kind of like the health authorities saying we need to inspect tourist cars coming across the border and make sure no one's smuggling Canada geese across the border in their cars. They're coming across the border everywhere on their wings. And Mars rocks have wings. They're coming over just like Canada geese. So just live with it. So we had a great debate on that. We had a great debate on the virtue or lack thereof of NASA's asteroid redirect mission. Okay. We were going to have a Trump-Clinton debate, but the Trump representative, the congressman, Republican, bowed out at the last minute, so Donna Smith, the Democrat, still talked, and we had a Trump supporter, a member of the Trump campaign, also present, so there was balance, but not a direct debate. However, we then had a really wild Trump-Clinton debate skit, which ours was better than Saturday Night Live.
And just so everybody hears it, who played Trump?
I did.
Okay, there you go. That was awesome.
Okay, it's online. It's in the Friday evening video, which has been posted online, along with video of all the other principal speakers and events, and it's pretty funny. Yeah. And then and Jancy McPhee, who's a great amateur actress, did Hillary. Then we had Pete Worden speak at the banquet. He is leading the Breakthrough Starshot Initiative, interstellar travel. Steve Hawking is part of that. And we also had the Gemini Mars contest. We had 10 university teams from around the world designing a two-person Mars flyby mission for 2024. And these were the finalists, the 10 finalists. And the British won, Cranfield University, followed by the number 2 was the Japanese. Number 3 were the Americans from Purdue. Number 4 was Russians from St. Petersburg. Number 5 was Italians from Turin. So that was quite something. But actually, all 10 designs were feasible, and it was a pretty tight pack on that.
So what was the difference between what was the primary plan for the winning team for the Mars flyby?
Well, I believe, if I recall correctly, the Cranfield University design used one SLS and one Falcon Heavy. They did a mate and dock in low Earth orbit, and the Falcon Heavy brought up the spacecraft, and the SLS brought up the propulsion stage. Mate and dock, boom, does trans-Mars injection, and away you go. And actually, I think all the designs, except for the Russian one was substantially different. The Russian design used about 6 launches of Proton-sized vehicles. But the other 4 all used either an SLS and a Falcon Heavy or 2 Falcon Heavies to do the mission. So either 1 or 2 launches.
And just for those listening who don't know the mission, what was the mission?
The mission was to take 2 people and shoot them off to fly by Mars and return to Earth, and do it by 2024. And so we had that contest. Yeah. Now, we also, of course, had reports from our university rover contest, where we have rovers compete doing exploration tasks in the desert, and that's going to continue. But we're also going to do a high school rover contest, and it's going to be done right here in Denver next May. High schools from across the country are welcome to enter to build a rover. We're going to be publishing the rules quite shortly, and they'll be competing at the Wings Over the Rockies Museum here in Denver, which is a major air and space museum. And we hope we're going to build this into a major national institution where young people can develop their technical skills by building Mars exploration robots, but furthermore get the lesson that if you learn your science, you can be an explorer of new worlds.
Yeah, and that's an awesome lesson. And for me, personally, I spoke at the event, myself and my business partner, Ron Sparkman from Opportunity U. We did a hybrid approach Mars mission where we basically see if we could combine different missions, split risk, split costs, see if we can find better ways. And what was great is my background is in cybersecurity and technology innovation. And our talk that we gave, we had lots of feedback from everybody. Everybody was engaged. I said, you guys are smart in that area. And so not only are you getting these great initiatives together, it gives us people that are into science, into Mars, an event to come together and talk and actually come up with solutions. So thanks for putting it on year after year. And at this point, I think we're going to wrap things up. So you have any last words for the those who are watching or listening?
Yeah. Mars is the great challenge of our time. And anyone can be part of the effort to make it happen.
Those are some powerful words, and it's true more so than ever. So thank you so much for joining us today. If you're watching this and you'd like to give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and we'll see you guys later. All right, thanks. Take care, Robert.